Okay, Ian, we're ready.
Right, hang on one sec.
And your microphone.
Cool, this is strange. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see people in 3D. We've all spent far too much time looking at screens. Although perhaps productivity has gone up, no doubt creativity has gone down, but it's good to see that we're all here today. I'd like to welcome you to our talk today about investing in studios. For me, it's kind of poacher turned gamekeeper, having been an entrepreneur most of my life. To go on this side of the fence, I think it's been a great learning for me, and also it's great to help the new talent realize their ambitions quicker than I did myself way back in the 1970s. I'm joined today by my Hero Capital colleague, Laurie, who's going to talk after I have done my little bit. So I think before we start, it'd be great to get an idea of the audience we're talking to today. So how many of you are currently working in studios? Okay, and how many of you have ever had finance in your studios? Okay, how many of you looking for studio finance? All right, okay, that's quite a broad audience, and I guess the others are doing something else. Right, we'll begin. As I said, I'm in Livingstone, been in the game for some time, and joined today by my Laurie. From my own personal point of view, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I ended up on this stage talking about investing in game studios. I joined the games industry not long after chess was invented, and started a company in 1975 called Games Workshop. I'm sure you're all familiar with Games Workshop. And then out of that came the opportunity to write interactive game books in the 1980s with Steve Jackson, my co-founder at Games Workshop. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this. This is just kind of a brief summary. And out of the game books, because of Death Trap Dungeon, came my entry into video games in the mid-80s by first as way of a designer, and then joining the company that was Domark after selling out a workshop. And we created Nuco Eidos in the 90s, which we floated on London Stock Exchange. And when Eidos was acquired by Square Enix of Japan, I realized I wasn't quite a person to be working for a large corporate myself, always been a kind of independent entrepreneur. I started angel investing and had some reasonably good successes in that space, one of them being Playdemic, the creators of Golf Clash. More recently, I was chairman of Sumo Group, still am. It's going through a sale process to Tencent right now. And I've also, of course, became a founding partner in Hero Capital, and that's what we're here to talk about today, about your ambition as a studio, whether some people want to just have a lifestyle business, they're very happy to have being independent and control of their own destiny, have enough money to be satisfied with what they're doing, have total ownership of everything they do, not having to account to anybody or be beholden to shareholders. I mean, that's a personal choice. Other people have more ambition to scale. It's a question of what scale do you want to be? Do you want to be a small company, a medium-sized company, or a large kind of world-conquering company? It's all down to personal ambition. And so it's quite important the kind of finance you wish to take on board. But I would argue quite strongly that it is a very good idea to get equity or whatever funding you want into your company to accelerate the growth of your studio. Back in the 70s, it wasn't quite so easy. This was Steve Jackson here, John Peake, and myself, three old school friends when we started Games Workshop in 1975. I was the really handsome guy at the far end there. We wanted to turn our hobby, like most of you in this room, from playing games into a business of making them. And we decided, because of course there was no internet, we didn't have mobile phones or anything in those days, that we'd like to reach out and try and create a games community, to kind of reach out to people and say that here we are, we play games and want to make games that are different to the ones you can buy in the toy shops. How many people are out there who are like us? So we published this full color glossy magazine here called Owl and Weasel. It cost 10p. It was 4 pages long. We were still very proud of what we'd done. And we sent it out to everybody we knew in games. And although we hadn't sent it him directly, a copy found its way onto the desk of this gentleman here, Gary Gygax, who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And unbeknownst to us, he liked reading the magazine, and he wrote back to us and said, enclosing a copy of this new game that he'd invented. It was called Dungeons and Dragons. And Steve and I became immediately obsessed by D&D. It was a kind of milestone in game history. We were playing games like Diplomacy at the time. And suddenly, here's this game where you're role-playing game, you go these fantastic journeys of the mind. I mean, the box didn't look very much, but when you opened it opened up your world, your imagination like no game had ever done before. I don't think any game ever will. The impact that D&D has had on the video games industry is absolutely incredible. So we ordered 6 copies of D&D because that's all the money we had. Steve and I said completely obsessed. John was not so impressed by it. He would prefer more traditional games. And on the back of that order of 6 copies, we were offered the exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for the whole of Europe by Gary Gygax. So there we were, being role-playing businessmen around a role-playing game. And of course, because we were making the industry up as it went along in those days, we didn't really have any competition. That all seemed absolutely perfectly legit to us. So we decided to chuck in our jobs and zoomed off to the States in '96 to go to Gen Con, the games convention run by Gary Gygax and his company TSR Hobbies. And in this photograph on the far side, you've got, although it looks a bit dark, it's Fritz Lieber, science fiction author. Next to him, Gary Gygax. Then Professor Barker invented a game called Empire of the Petal Throne. Me holding the boxes, Rob Kuntz, another author of D&D books, and Steve smirking at the front. And we came back to the UK having given up our flat. We had no money, and all the stock that we'd ordered, because we signed up all these fledgling games companies in the US. We'd had sent all the stock to my girlfriend at the time's flat, even though she didn't know it was all coming. Our existing stock was held up in a garage somewhere. So we came back, and we decided that we needed an office and somewhere to live. But unfortunately, we didn't have anywhere to live. So it was a case of having this office the size of a bread bin in Shepherd's Bush. And we go to the bank manager, who, not this guy particularly, but he reminds me of this character I found on the internet, and say, hello, we've got this great game. It's a role-playing game. A hero, a wizard, go these fantastic journeys of the mind. And he looked at us rather like a dog watches television, had absolutely no understanding of what we were talking about. And we were kind of bewildered that he didn't want to lend us any money. And then over time, you realize that we weren't what we call investor ready. All we were there was going in on our enthusiasm with absolutely no data to support our case to justify a bank loan, let alone equity investment. And I think that's quite the important thing you have to do, that you have to make yourself prepared to be able to give comfort and at least a degree of knowledge about the revenue coming into your business. We had none of that. We were just crazy young guys, just on a mission to change the world through Dungeons and Dragons. So we had to live in a van for 3 months. This was Van Morrison, Steve's van, and we parked the van outside the little office, and we used to stay in the office till like midnight, go into the van. It was October, it was raining, it was horrible, and all that stuff. And we also joined a squash club nearby, so we could get out of the van, go for a shave and a shower, etc. in the morning, and got really good at squash by default. And then we decided we had to up our game. So we dumped Alan Weasel and started White Dwarf magazine, and also we started Citadel Miniatures in 1978, and we opened our very first store in 1978 in April. But this was still 3 years later. It had taken us actually 3 years to open our very first retail store. And that was a slow process because we were operating out of cash flow. We had no working capital to accelerate that process, to put systems in place, to give us a runway where we could hire the best people to accelerate that process. And so in a way, we're we were really slowing down the growth, which of course would have given other people the opportunity to compete with us, except that there wasn't much competition back in the 1970s. So of course, everyone knows how Games Workshop has become the force it is today. Steve and I sold out in the early 90s. Some might say a little bit too soon, given it's now worth £4 billion on the London Stock Exchange, but hey-ho. And the most important thing, again, about Workshop is intellectual property. So many studios in the video game space trade away their IP for project finance, and not particularly becoming work for hire, but end up by having to share their revenues when they might ordinarily be able to benefit 100% from their own endeavors and retain ownership of their IP and also build value in their company. Now, we had this 3-year exclusive agreement for D&D, at the end of which Gary Gygax came over to the UK and said, I want to merge our two companies, Games Workshop and TSR Hobbies. And Steve and I, being kind of independent young Brits at the time, said no to that merger opportunity. And suddenly found ourselves losing exclusivity. We remained the largest distributor because, again, they only took quite some time to set up TSR Hobbies UK. But we realized how vulnerable you are if you don't own your own IP. So we decided that we had to try pretty hard. So we launched a few board games that ultimately the success came from the Citadel side with Brian Ansell, Richard Hallowell, and Rick Pleasley working to create the first Warhammer, which came out in 83. And of course, the whole value of Workshop has been built primarily on the back of Warhammer 40k, and you can see how they're rebranding their shops from Games Workshop to Warhammer shops. So it's that ownership of value, ownership of IP. Not only does it allow you to determine your own destiny, but also allows you to greater increase value in your company. That's where the value rides in the intellectual property ownership. So moving on from the IP ownership, I said I've moved into writing interactive game books. And first one came out in 1982, The Warlock of Fivetop Mountain. And they were hugely successful. And as I said, the kind of gateway to me getting into video games is that when Death Trap Dungeon appeared in 1984, it's #1 in the bestsellers charts. And the founders of a startup called Domoc came to me and said, would I write their launch title, which was Eureka, that came out in 1985. And when I sought out a Workshop, I joined Domoc, decided not to take royalties, I took equity instead, invested some more money, perhaps at the worst time in the world, because in those days with hardware platforms, it's just about when the 16-bit market was falling off the edge of a cliff. And so we had to put four companies together, IDOS Technologies, which is a video compression company, Simis and Deep Red, and Domoc to create Nuco IDOS, which we floated in 95. And of course, IDOS was most famous for publishing Tomb Raider, which we acquired actually from Centergoal, which we acquired in March 96 and launched Tomb Raider in October 96. And again, I became exec chairman and become, as a publisher, again, the mantra around intellectual property, the value of IDOS was in ownership as well as publishing of Deus Ex, Tomb Raider, Hitman, and other great titles. And really what started a simple sketch became a multi-billion-dollar franchise. So I can't stress enough how important IP ownership is. All these companies here, successful in their own right, were all willing to give IDOS money to allow Tomb Raider and Lara Croft in particular to promote their products. Not only did it give us money, they were also promoting Tomb Raider at the same time by association with their products. So it really was a big win. So leaving IDOS when Square Enix made their acquisition, I began investing in independent studios as an angel. And the ones on this side I've had exits from, and these are ongoing. And I'm not going to talk obviously about angel investing too much today, except that I find it particularly exciting to meet teams, because what I look for is not, when people ask me about the 3 most important things about a game, I will say gameplay, technology, and graphics, albeit vital, still play a supporting role. It's for me, it's the team that is the most important thing. In these two cases, in both Playdemic and Mediatonic, you had a fantastic business person on an equal footing and partnership with the creative person, and they both enabled each other to be do great things. And I like to think it's the same with these other companies that I think she's showing on this slide. So there is a whole raft of other things we go through when we're talking about due diligence, when we're looking at studios, where it's technology, monetization, the business of games, etc. But you have to think about it from your side. What you're looking to do with your company. I mean, if you're a small company, you're looking to just bootstrap and get money from friends and family. The further you can get along the line of being able to show people what you're able to do, the more likely it is you are to get funding. There are also great initiatives in terms from what the government offers from EIS and SEIS, the Enterprise Investment Scheme that is very tax advantageous for people to invest in your companies. So make sure, if you can, that you're able to apply and be given advance assurance that you qualify for those to be able to offer your investors. Do you want to go for a bank loan? Always, from my experience, always a nightmare because they don't really understand digital content, intangible assets, games in particular. It's not really their area of expertise. They can't see what the upside would be. Do you want to go for project finance? A very good, viable option for you, of course. You might want to get publisher funding, but publishers do an incredible job. Of course they do, but there's always a price to pay. You're going to be revenue sharing. There's a question of intellectual property ownership, but it still might be the right decision for you as a company. And last but not least, what about equity? So I'm here finally to talk about venture capital and why I find it so fascinating and as a great mechanism to support studios of all sizes, where it's a late seed, Series A, what we define as at Heroes between 1 and 3 million euros, or follow-on capital Series B, which is between 3 and 7 million euros in investment. So what does a venture capitalist actually do? Well, it's here define it as a mechanism whereby investors support entrepreneurial talent by providing finance and business skills in order to obtain long-term capital gains by exploiting market opportunities. What's that mean in summary? Well, we invest not just money, but we invest our skills. In Hero in particular, we have deep skills in various aspects, from finance to curtains falling down, to technology, to monetization, to partnerships and relationships. And we're aligned with our investee company. We're both in the same seat to be aligned on the back end. The success of the company is also going to be successful for the investing company. So why VC funding? Well, in Europe in particular, and in the UK in extra particular, if that's such an expression, is that we've also always over-delivered in content, but always been underserved by capital. We always hear about UK and European studios creating world-breaking blockbusters around the world, but always struggling to get money into their studios. Now, as I said, it's quite important that some people don't realize how it's the importance of being investor ready. It's very difficult to get funding on the back of a PowerPoint. When I invest as an angel, I need to see some kind of what the Americans call skin in the game, how much you've personally invested yourselves, not just in time, but money yourself, that you're actually going to share some of the risk. Like to see a bit of pain, frankly. We lived in the van for 3 months. You learn an awful lot from that pain. And to see that you're doing something genuinely different with passion. So Hero, I'm going to hand over to Spike in a second, who's been waiting here very patiently. But where do we see the opportunity? Well, as I said, there's quite a lot of opportunity to get going in this world through the government funding, the benefits of video games tax relief, to get to a certain point. But as I said, it's not about a PowerPoint. The more you can show a technology, a demo, the team, your ability to execute, you might have failed. We're not bothered by failure. Failure is just success, work in progress. Everybody learns from their mistakes. And you take those learnings and create new content that might have a greater success going forward. So we're interested in that gut funding, which is between the private equities and the larger funds who want to scale up really successful businesses. We sit between that and the startup capital. So over to young Spike here, who's going to tell you a little bit about the team after I've just explained my co-partners, co-founders of the fund are Luke Alvarez and Cherry Freeman. Were all ex-entrepreneurs. They're far smarter than I am, but they don't have the games experience that I do. But together, we are a pretty good team, plus all the people we have in the Hero team itself. So young Spike is coming on now to take over.
Young Spike is here. Hello. Thanks, Ian. So yes, Hero Capital was born about 2 years ago, and to date has done 20 investments in the games industry, in the esports and streaming industry, and in digital sports. You can have a little look at the timeline. You can see we get more ambitious as we go along, and closing more deals. We've just sort of got 3 which are closed but not announced. And so within the team that Ian was alluding to, we've been working very hard. We've seen over 2,000 game studios and opportunities, and these are sort of the 20 investments that we've made. And I'm very delighted to say that we've got here at Develop, the Flavorworks guys are here, the Happy Volcano guys will be here, and also the Forever team will be here as well. So if any of you want to find out what it's like to be a founder invested by Hero Capital, I suggest that you say hello to them. And hopefully they'll say nice things about Ian and Hero. Why venture capital? I was in a talk earlier and I heard a question from a lady in the audience who said that venture capitalists weren't aligned with the studios. Why would you take venture capital money if they're not aligned with you? And that's a really good point, because as venture capitalists, I think we feel that there is strong alignment there in the right cases. You know, you need to think about it. Is venture capital right for you? And are you right for venture capital? It isn't for everybody. And that's a good and a bad thing. There are plenty of very successful businesses out there who are still completely privately or independently owned and are doing fantastic things, hugely admirable. And they've managed to do it like Ian did, through bootstrapping and through other means, or working with publishers or other methods. This sort of very scientific graph is meant to show sort of the opportunities here. With venture capital, the investor is expecting you to exit, is expecting at one time you're to grow something and build your business in a much quicker, much bigger way than you could without the funding. Think of venture capital funding as sort of fuel going into the engine to turbocharge it. But ultimately, there is an expectation, hopefully that's aligned, that there will be an exit there. Everybody wins big. Now, obviously, there's risk in that sort of scenario, and also it also means you can have a fantastic lifestyle business. You can run a brilliant company and support yourselves and your employees without venture capital funding. But think about it, whether that's right for you, whether you are aligned with that ultimate exit scenario. The pros, obviously, being that you get a lot of working capital very quickly to realize your ambition and your vision. One of the things that it's important to impart today is what we look for. This is just us as Hero Capital, but I would hope that a lot of other VCs align along these principles. In general, they do. And the first thing that we look for is a great team. That's really important. Our thesis as a fund, we know that the industry is a hit-driven industry. We know that you can have fantastic teams who have had near misses or have failed. And to Ian's point earlier, that failure is part of being a successful entrepreneur and running a successful business. And so our philosophy is, when we're investing, we're not investing in a specific idea or a specific project. We're investing in you, the team, and we're giving you the runway and the breathing room and the opportunity to be successful. And we know that not your next project, it might not be the one that makes it for everybody and makes it for you. And so we're there in the long term as a equity partner. We also look for a deep moat, so we want that to be defensible. We want that team to be defensible, and a moat can come in many ways. It can come through technology, whether that's you've got some particular patents that are very defensible, or perhaps you've got some really deep creative or intellectual property which sets you apart and makes it very hard for other people to copy what you're doing. Or perhaps some particularly strong KPIs. Perhaps it's a network effect moat where you've got a community around you, or you're moving very fast because of the network of people that are using or talking about your product. As I mentioned, and on the graph before, you see that we want scale, and that means we also need a breakout opportunity. And that can be hard for developers who are sort of not. A lot of venture capitalists or a lot of funds today are led by the buzzwords of the industry today. Does it have UGC? Is it mobile first? Is it massively multiplayer? Does it have the blockchain? You know, all these sorts of things are kind of, to a lot of funds who are a little less focused, very exciting because they can think of it as a breakout opportunity. That doesn't mean that Hero won't invest in, you'll see some examples, but in more sort of linear content opportunities, or opportunities that don't have those buzzwords associated with them. But ultimately, there's an expectation there on the size of the business, and some industries and some parts of that business make that easier to achieve. But most importantly, for us at Hero, we invest in great games with great gameplay. And that for us is really important. And that's the ethos that Ian has instilled in us in the fund, to find the fun. And because ultimately, as gamers, we're here to have fun and to play. And that's important. So I'm going to give you some examples of each of these, just to give you an idea of our thinking. And each of these examples break our rule in a little way. We often say that we're a Series A and B venture capital fund, which means we're a little bit later stage than angel investors or seed investors. However, this was, by all intents and purposes, an early seed. This is Tim Longo, Forrest Swat Out Large, and the rest of the team is Jeff Morris and Brett Duville. They came to us very early. They were still all working for other game studios. Tim here was the creative director of Halo. Forrest was the senior producer on the Hitman series, and the team came to us and said, look, we have this great idea for a game. We're all deep industry veterans. We've got 8 of us together who have all been in the industry a very long time, and we want to go out and make our own studio. And we broke our rule of Series A and B because they were so strong on that first vertical for us of team. It was an excellent team. They're now working on a AAA multiplayer FPS game. The team's doing fantastically well. We invested in them just, I think it was 6 months ago now. And actually, the contract literally said, which is a first for me, that the founding team had to all write letters saying that as soon as the money hit the bank account, they would quit their jobs and hand in their notice and start to move over. So really emphasizes that strong team and what we look for. Secondly, it's a moat. This is Polyarc. Hopefully a lot of you who've played Moss will know Polyarc Studios. They are, again, a veteran team, but they had come from Bungie originally and working on console games. They switched a few years ago to VR before everybody was sort of, now, you know, a lot of people doing VR, but they switched early, and their thesis was very simple. We want to be a big fish in a small pond, and we think that pond is going to grow. And so by the time that we invested in Polyarc, they had built, and Moss was a success, and they wanted to become a multi-game studio. They wanted to make Moss 2 and other titles, and so they came to us for funding. And for us, the moat here is 2 things. Firstly, the knowledge and the expertise in VR in a nascent industry. They'd taken the working practices from AAA console games, applied it to VR, and they had a really good head start on everybody else thinking about VR and games in VR. And secondly, they had intellectual property, deep intellectual property with Quill and the world of Moss that Polyarc had created, which could be translated to other media in the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about this one because I'm not really allowed to. but this is Emily and Shelby, the two founders of Double Loop Games. This for us was really, again, veteran team, so ticks that box, but the breakout opportunity. They are creating mobile games for a very, very underserved and large market, which is people who don't already know or think that they're gamers. It's looking at the demographics in the games industry that the traditional industry isn't focusing on and looking at. And again, it's probably a little bit of a bet like Polyarc with VR Early. They're betting that this market's going to grow and get bigger, and they want to be in the forefront of that market. And we think it's a huge opportunity, and we certainly want to back two female founders. And finally, great gameplay. And this, again, was another big rule break for us. Jeroen is here from Happy Volcano. He's come over for the show. And this is You Suck at Parking by Happy Volcano. We run an event called the Dark Star. If you haven't heard about it, you can look on our website and find out when the next one is. We've had over 600 game studios come who aren't within our focus much earlier than we'd normally focus on to learn a little bit about funding, venture capital, what to look for. This studio came from one of our Dark Star events. They reached out to us afterwards. We often talk to the studios that come if they want a meeting with us, and they showed us this fantastic game, and we sort of fell in love with it. The spark, the creativity, really, it's very, very fun. It's on Steam. You can play it and have fun. You've basically got to park, and you can't stop, and it's really good. And so we again broke our rules for them and invested much earlier than we normally would. We are a lot more operational with them than we would be with other studios. We have great talent in the Hero Capital team, people like Nicholas Lovell and John Jordan now on the blockchain side to really help studios that are part of our portfolio. It's not just about money. And this is a great example of a studio with great gameplay. So we're doing pretty well. We've got 14 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, well, first of all, if you want to get in touch, you can email us at hello@hero.capital. We'd love to hear from you, especially as there's so many studios in the room. But if anybody has any questions, Ian and I would love to answer them. Yeah, let's start with this lady right next to you.
Hi there, thanks for the chat. You mentioned blockchain capability right at the end. There's quite a lot of hype and sort of interest in sort of NFTs and crypto in general. We're seeing quite a lot of capital going in now. So I'm just curious to hear your take from Hero Capital, what you think of that space and what you think of studios that are being quite proactive in that area.
Do you want to take that, Ian, or shall I?
You can start. I'm happy to take it. I mean, I'll just start it off by my own understanding of where we are. I mean, NFTs seem to be galloping apace, but what games can do is add a utility function. So there's a reason for them to exist, to add real value. I think blockchain games themselves have been a bit poor because they've been designed mainly by crypto people. But if you use the blockchain for games, then that's a different proposition. It's going to have a lot more upside, I would have thought. So that's a very thin veneer of where I am right now, but maybe Spike would like to add some more to that.
Well, I think, you know, I think my opinion, but the fund's opinion as well, is we're certainly at the top of the hype cycle right now when it comes to NFTs, and we're sort of in the very early beginning of them, people playing with them. If you've seen the Mechaverse NFTs, the new floor prices, all-time low this morning. You know, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of people doing stuff, but where's the substance? And you know, as a fund, we're waiting, and we want to talk to the people who are building for the long term. What is it going to look like in 2 years? Now's the time to build. Now's the time to start using that technology and playing with it and seeing where it can go. But certainly, we're definitely at the top of the hype cycle. I think, you know, the prices are getting pretty eye-watering, so I don't think it can sustain. But we'll see what happens. Yes, this gentleman here.
How do you evaluate teams that maybe haven't had a really successful hit before? So, for example, Splitgate, I think the guys that founded that game or created that game started it from their dorm rooms at university, and you know, maybe it was going to be a success, maybe it wasn't going to be a success, but I don't think they had a big hit before that game.
I think they had a pretty fair wind behind them, that team, and obviously the game performed very, very well in terms of users. But I think if I recall correctly, they had some issues with the servers and things like that. And now they've gone out and raised a very, very big amount of money, very big valuation, and good on them for doing that. I think time will tell now. They've got to spend that money wisely and to make a fantastic game. I've no doubt that they will, but. The community certainly loved that game, but there were, teething issues, and probably those teething issues came because they were a relatively young and inexperienced team. So let's see what happens.
Hi, thanks for the talk. First, fanboy, I absolutely loved Death Trap Dungeon. Played it like mad.
Well, today was a great thing for Death Trap Dungeon. I don't know if you know, but it was today's the launch of. Guardians of the Galaxy that was developed by Eidos Montreal, published by Square Enix, and Death Trap Dungeon makes a little official Easter egg appearance in the game. If you want to play through Guardians of the Galaxy, you'll see the original edition of Death Trap in there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, right, say you invest and the team's missing something, that sort of scale, you're hiring like mad. Where do you guys fit in? Are you going to matchmake, or are you going to stand off and say, no, this HR, you guys build out, or will you introduce kind of matchmake on the behalf of the studio?
It's in our interest to make a studio as good as it possibly could be. So I said quite categorically, it's not just about money. We bring smart money. We can bring expertise in any area. We've got a big network of people who we think might solve your problem for you if it's not us directly. And that it goes for people, technology, business models, relationships, publishers, etc. We have a pretty good book of knowledge that we can help with any company. So it's in our interest as well. That's why I'm saying we are aligned. If you succeed, we succeed. So it's important to us that we find the right people for you, because effectively, we're this, not the same company, but we're certainly on the same side of the pitch.
And just a second question, is a sale to another company, say I got acquired by Zoom, is that an exit you're looking for?
Is that an exit or?
You're looking for?
Well, ideally, VCs look for a kind of minimum 5 times multiple, or hopefully 10 times, and pray to God maybe a unicorn at some point. But an exit at some point, but there's no pressure. You agreed beforehand what personal ambition is. If those ambitions match with our criteria, great. But we don't force anybody to. So no, it's Tuesday, the 28th of July. It's time we exit it. It's when it's right for everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, really wonderful to hear and see some of those snapshots from the history. So thanks for taking us through that. Bit of a two-tiered question. And the first one is, what's your view on immersive? And you've kind of touched on that because you backed a company, but you put down your criteria. And what's your view, or how interested are you in services, products that aren't explicitly a game, but are adjacent to the gaming experience? I'm thinking things like a social immersive experience for the viewing of esports, for example.
Go ahead.
I mean, we like immersive, obviously, and we're seeing more and more trend towards that. The Oculus Quest 2 sales, for example, a great example of and there's a huge breadth of content available there. If anybody else has tried the Void ever, a really cool experience, and I think it's becoming more and more part of the lexicon of our entertainment kind of lives. As for immersive viewing experiences in esports specifically, I think that's an interesting one because it has struggled a little bit in the past. I think Silver.tv and other people like that have tried to do it. Twitch makes it very hard for those sorts of experiences. I mean, Twitch, people love and hate Twitch, but the fact that you have at your fingertips a community as well of people that are watching and enjoying something really helped esports grow and build esports to start with out of Justin TV and then into Twitch and everything that they're doing. The jury's not out though. I think there's obvious things that people can be doing with immersive and esports. You know, in-game, for example, volumetric data and things like that. But I don't think we've seen anything yet that really people go, wow, this is a reason to move off Twitch or, you know, to do that.
But as a fund itself, perhaps I should have explained earlier on, we apportion 50% of the fund to games and game studios, also 25% to immersive and VR and esports, etc., and also 25% to what we call D-sports, which is anything, wearables, anything active that throws off data. Think of Peloton being not quite right because it's still somebody broadcasting to, but you think of Zwift, where the bike is the controller and you're competing against other people on screen, and that's throwing off data. So that's kind of in the area of a gamification of some activity also fits within our arena.
Yeah, so quadrants that aren't just pure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually FidXR is another really great intersect there, which is digital sports, it's workouts, boxing, it's HIIT classes in virtual reality on your Oculus headset, and it's a really great workout, and it's definitely immersive, and it's adjacent to games. So the answer is yes.
I think we've got time for a couple more. We think we'll get thrown out of here in 3 minutes.
No more questions. We've completed it.
Any more for any more? Yes.
Sorry, you mentioned how important IP is to the, I suppose, acquisition of a project. I was just interested in, are you investing then in IP or in companies, and how does that sort of work together? Would you consider, say, investing in an IP, but then the IP gets sold, as in that's the exit strategy, but the company continues? I'm just trying to sort of understand that.
Well, ideally, we're investing in a company that owns IP. We're not vendors or buyers of intellectual property in itself, not particularly, no. Yeah. Right.
One more there,
at the back.
and then, yeah.
Where would you guys say that your balance is between sort of predictive and reactive acquisitions? Are you looking mostly to be in that sort of predictive space, or are you looking to get things that you think are going to be a more confident bet based on what's existing out there in the market?
Well, I think it's a mix. I think, you know, if you look at our portfolio, we've got a mix of studios. I'll use Polyarc as another example. Snowprint, a great example. You know, one's a very deft virtual reality studio. One is a very experienced mobile game studio, and they've both got games out, making significant revenue, big teams, sort of. I think that straddles the line. It's not super predictive, but it's not very reactive either. But at the same time, there are some funds that you see who are pouring money into blockchain at the moment, very early, very speculative bets, because they think blockchain is, you know, they wonder where it's going to go. That isn't quite where we are as well. We are looking for a little bit more confidence before we start sort of writing lots of checks for lots of inexperienced teams who are building things that are as yet unknown. Ian, I don't know if there's anything to add to that.
No, that's fine. So who wants investment then? See this man.
One more, and then cool.
Thank you very much, Ian, for the talk, and thanks as well, Spike, for the talk. Ian, how would you recommend a first-time kind of studio founder reach out to you to ask for advice?
Ask for a what?
To ask for advice.
Advice? I always have to give advice.
Yeah. Okay, beer. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Let's do the last one. Absolutely.
Yeah, so great talk. Thanks, Ian. So like going back to my childhood, literally. So that's awesome. What are your ethical investment policies? I'd love to hear that, actually, especially we talk about blockchain. Obviously, blockchain, part of that gets a bit of a bad rep because of the power consumption. and so on. And I'm sure there's other ethical concerns. So yeah, just love to hear what your policy is in these areas.
Well, we have literally passed on investments which could make some people very rich because of our ESG and ethical guidelines. We have a hard rule in the fund that we will not back any gambling companies or technology companies whose technology is used for gambling, for example. For us, the founders are very, very important, and you know, I mean, I'm obviously not going to elaborate it, but I can think of one investment which we again passed on because we didn't quite feel right, the attitude of the founders and the team. So that's very important to us. And I think if you look at our portfolio, I know it's very on trend at the moment to talk about, you know, diversity and inclusion and things like that. We're all, you know, if you look at our portfolio and our founders that we back, it is quite a mix, and it's and we think that's good because the more varied opinions and approaches and experiences that founders have, the more likely they are to succeed.
We have a very strong ESG policy. Look at our website. You know, we do a lot of due diligence, not just on the companies we're investing in, but on the products, the technology, and also on the people investing in Hero Capital too. So we're pretty strong on that, and people have said so. So you can check that out.
Cool. Thank you very much.